Welcome to the Indian Silicon Valley podcast. I'm your host, Jivraj, and today I have with me the co-founder and CEO of one of India's largest D2C roll-up plays. Thank you so much, Bhavna, for joining me. I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting you today.
Amazing to be here. I've been waiting to be on this podcast. I was waiting for my name to pop up, but thanks for having me.
That's super kind of you to mention, Bhavna. But what you're doing with 10 Club is, of course, extremely disruptive and as category creating as it gets. And there was this entire rage last year about the roll up space. But now that the dust is somewhat settling and there's some progress to be made, it'll be phenomenal to understand, how it plays out in actuality and what you've been doing at 10 Club. But before we dive deeper into that, right, I want to start on the abstract note of understanding what acquisitions in the ecosystem mean, considering that you have a background in which your last startup was acquired. What you do currently with 10 Club also requires a lot of course, negotiations and talking to founders and D2C builders who are getting acquired in some shape or form by the roll-up place. How do you think the sentiment around acquisitions, mergers, acquisitions in the ecosystem is? And what do founders think about this? What, in your experience, plays out during these conversations? I think that'd be an interesting way to start off.
I mean, that's a lot of questions rolled into one. So I'll try answering as many as I can, and then feel free to kind of dig in a little bit more. I think acquisitions is a broad stroke. I think the roll-up play is 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 um, is unique in its own way, right? And I think we as a market are not an acquisition and merger market. It is, as an ecosystem, we're very early, right? We're less than a decade old, honestly, from any kind of maturity. And I think these are the early signs of what an M&A market looks like in at least our ecosystem. So of course there had to be a lot of noise. I think there's always noise in anything that's really early. But I think the noise is always a reflection of the opportunity ahead, right? And if you don't hear that noise, potentially the opportunity isn't as exciting. So I think for us, I mean, the truth about 10 Club, and I need to talk about it, right? I'm not a banker. I don't come from the M&A background at all. I've also not spent time in the Indian e-commerce ecosystem, right? I have built a marketplace prior to this, but in another emerging market. So I think for us, it was a lot of new things coming together, but I think it was a very fascinating idea. And the one lesson I come from, because we went through a merger and I went through an acquisition through a pandemic, right? So I sold my company a month before the pandemic hit, and it was months of negotiation before that. And no one's ever going to tell you that it's a bed of roses, right? It's always hard. And I mean, at the end of it, it's great. And usually the best kind of deals are when there is a win-win on both sides. When the deal is not equal, even on a little level, it's unfair and it's bound to break, right? So for me, I went through a merger 6 months through a different continent through time. It was hard, right? And I basically ended that saying, never again, not on either sides, right? I mean, but at the end of it, you feel great, right? You've built something, somebody has seen value in it, somebody's paid good money to acquire it. You see your team going in, you want to also find your team go to the right people, so it's a baby that you've brought, and giving it up is hard, but I don't think it's as emotional as many people make it out to be, right? I think most entrepreneurs build something, and today's entrepreneurs build to find liquidity for all stakeholders also, right? It's also a massive part of why people build. Maybe 2 decades ago, the sentiment was different.
Yeah.
I think that sentiment has changed, and that was what was interesting, right? And I think that's changing. Last year when we started, we at 10 Club spent 6 months just studying the market. We didn't do anything. We just had conversations, right? And for me, it was important to have those conversations because I had to listen and learn. Um, and I love it because I think when you start with a clean slate, you start asking the most fundamental questions, right? And I think that's why kids learn the best, because I think there's no baggage. There is no right way to do something. And I think that is the sentiment that we started with, saying, hey, we know how it feels to be on the other side. Now, how do you come onto the buy side and do it with as much authenticity, as much heart, realizing that you've been through this journey and you know it's going to be a hard one.
Yeah.
And I think that was it, right? So you start with that, you start asking questions. We only really started rolling out offers when we felt like we had a thesis and we felt like we understood what the template and the price should be for India, and where is the upside and where is the win-win for both, right? And I think that was it. And honestly, there was nobody. I'm sure M&A deals have been done in the market, but I think for this ecosystem, there hadn't been. I
Yeah,
think all of us built our thesis honestly only second half of last year,
yeah,
right? And I think there's a method to the madness that has begun to
yeah.
take shape. Yeah.
Certainly, I think that that's fascinating to hear. And what's all the more interesting, I mean, you touched on it a bit, in the last part of your answer, but you come from a real estate background, you took a sabbatical, you took time to understand the market. And at the time, you could say that it was relatively new. Only it was when, we started seeing a lot of players come up in the space is when a lot of people started believing in the opportunity, right? Talk us through what you saw in this space, right? Like when you were going through studying this space, when you didn't come from the background, right? That beginner's mindset that you were able to inculcate, what did you find out and where did you gather the conviction that, okay, this is a 10-year opportunity that I want to go after. We're going to build a team and go after this. This is the new India where we're going to see brands coming in. Talk us through that entire ideology, which, lay the fundamentals well enough for 10 Club and, got you started.
Yeah, you said sabbatical. I didn't take a sabbatical. I thought I was taking a sabbatical, but
Okay.
uh,
I remember a 10-day gap or so.
yeah, 2 weeks. It was 2 weeks of settling down. Then we said we'll take time to study the market, but we were doing 4 or 5 calls a day. And
Wow.
4 or 5 calls a day was literally 1.5, 2 hours with each partner. So it
Mhm.
was a good 8 to 10 hour day for months together. And it was fascinating, right? Because we had to start finding patterns.
Mm.
And, we were talking to partners across revenue cycles, across categories. We were hearing stories, different age groups. It was really diverse, right? And then you started seeing patterns, right? After you do enough of those conversations, you start seeing the patterns. But I think I don't know if this answers your question, but let me try. I think for us during the research period, it was not just conversations with partners. I think that was also interesting where honestly, we didn't try studying the market externally. We actually reached out. One of our first emails was to Thrasio, and my co-founder, I think one of the reasons we kind of got into this was we actually spent time talking to Carlos, and Carlos connected us to our first investor. So, I think it was a very interesting, he spoke to us. He said, listen, I'm building this. I've got 2.5 years. I'm very happy to share. And he's a true entrepreneur, right? Who wants to see
Yeah.
other people. And his energy was infectious. And, he spoke about the entire opportunity, very selflessly spoke about all the mistakes, right? And I really enjoyed that, where he said, everyone's going to tell you the rosy side, but here's the other
Yeah.
side that you need to be prepared for. And after we spoke to him, we actually spoke to Heyday. They invested in us directly, right? So Sebastian was great and he shared his learnings. And we ended up speaking to 6, 7 other players in international markets who've built, tried a different strategy, iterated. And every time you have a conversation with each of them, you realize that of course the broad brushstrokes sound the same, but it's the nuances that are interesting, right? And it comes down to the founder, what they're close to, what they believe their strength is. And this is a deep operating business, right? And if you don't kind of find that crux of what you are going to bring in, there's no point doing it. So I think for us that was really important. While we were talking to sellers on ground, we were talking to D2C players, we were talking to marketplace players. You started this podcast by calling us a D2C roll up play.
But
I'm
it's a
not.
marketplace. Yeah.
I think we had to take a call. That being said, it doesn't mean that this is all we will do. But
Yeah.
one of the biggest lessons we learned is this opportunity is so large
Mm.
that there will never be just one player. It is an entire model that's starting to emerge, and each of us have to refine what we're going to do, and we need to go deep. You can't go too wide. This is not. I think a lot of people had a lot of trouble. They called us marketplace or e-commerce point 2.0 or something, right? It's not that. It's all of us have to kind of take our thesis and build it. And that's something we learned with all of the conversations we had with them, saying don't overestimate this, don't think you can do everything, pick your lane, stick to it, and go really deep. I think the third part of this funnel was capital, right? I do think India ecosystem was still just warming up to the idea. We did our rounds, we spoke to everybody. They had said the number of people who said this is not going to work in India. The same spiel where you start something new and you hear all the negatives first. The market's not deep enough. It's too early. Sellers will not sell. There is no arbitrage. Debt is not going to come in. So all of that, right? So I think for us, we had to speak to a bunch of different capital partners because that is a crux to the right kind of capital.
Yeah.
It's the crux to this business. So I think it was a culmination of all of this, and it took 6 months.
Yeah.
It took 6 months to get all of this together.
Nice. No, I think what I'm hearing is, I love the fact that you went internal as opposed to going external, and the part that, you focused on the nuances and the focus, which has been ironclad since day one. I think that stands out because, a lot of the conventional wisdom can be figured out along the way, but your model, I'm guessing, requires that kind of focus from day one.
So we had time. So I think it was also that, right? I'm not saying we
Mhm.
have all the answers. I think we had the
Yeah.
answers of what our foundation should be.
Yeah.
And then we started actually operating. And I mean, anyone's kidding if they say all hell doesn't break loose. It breaks loose, and there's something breaking every day.
Of course.
And, we laugh about it because partners tell us this, that
Mhm.
they pull 15, 16 hours a day, and 95% of what they do is just fixing problems.
Mhm.
And they're quite fundamental, the problems, right?
Yeah.
So the truth is, we're running a massive operating machine today, and there's something breaking all the time. And if you don't get
Yeah.
comfortable with, you're going to wake up and say, three things are broken today.
Yeah.
Great. Yesterday was five. Today it's three. It's a good day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing. I think that's one of the things that stands out about the podcast founders that I've hosted, right? I mean, for founders, it just becomes a steady state, right? Like firefighting is almost your a default mode, and it's amazing how they just adapt to it. So kudos to all of you doing the amazing work in generating the value. But as you pointed out, right, and in fact, for the record, right, 10 Club does acquire, let's say, marketplace brands, and there's a ironclad focus as well that you can perhaps let us know. And in fact, if you can maybe give us a 101 on, let's say what the 10 Club model is, also maybe give us the fundamentals, because I'm guessing that some amount of education on that front will be important. But I know that, you have a focus on specific sectors as well, the kind of categories you want to go after. You're starting with marketplace brands and you have a thesis for that too. So if you can lay that down for us, Bhavna, that would be very interesting to understand how 10 Club goes about this model and what differentiates it, and maybe we can build from there.
Sure. Let me maybe take a step and tell you the different ways this can be built out. At least it's kind of beginning. I think it's unique to India that we've
Yeah.
got certifications. I think globally there's still a set standard. I think for us it was marketplace D2C, right? That's core. Or maybe let me go one more step behind. I think it was choosing category,
Yes.
right? You're choosing which category. And I think there's a very large business to be built in apparel and lifestyle in India, huge. We chose to stay away from it because, one, I think it's very complex. And I think when you choose to go down this, there is a set of expertise needed. I think there is a set of variation in each business that you run because it comes down to creative design, fundamentals, seasons, sizes, so I think it gets really, really complex to run this. Is there an opportunity to build? Of course there is, and there is somebody building, and I think the right person building for this space, right? For us, very clearly, we thought that was too many variables to start with. I think there is a big opportunity in beauty and personal care. Um, we stayed a little away from it because I think there was a little bit of an overlap of India's venture funds kind of backing a fair amount of these ventures. I think it comes down to the entrepreneur definitely being involved. There is a brand innovation pulse to it. Again, incredible opportunity to build for. I think it was not what we wanted to do. For us, where we discovered the most amount, we kind of had an affinity, and through our conversations, where we went was we think India primarily is still an unbranded, unorganized market. We're a deeply price sensitive market that wants value. And I think today's consumers are getting more sensitive to the fact that if you can provide me high value, high quality for the right price, I will purchase your product. But I think we're also becoming a very experimental market, which is, I think people are changing and their spending brackets change so often that we're constantly experimenting with brands. We're not loyalists really, right? So I think it was a lot of that. We think in the next decade, there's an opportunity to build homegrown businesses and brands, but those brands don't exist, at least in the marketplace today, right? So for us, we went to home, which I think is a massive not online retail, on ground first business that is aggressively moving online. But it is difficult, right? Because the last mile with large home led products is hard to fulfill. So I think that's a complex structure that needs a lot more expertise than individual sellers doing it. So there was a problem in the market, there's an opportunity, and it is unbranded, right? So they're not started creating brands. So for us, that was an open space saying, hey, this opportunity of paying X, getting 100% control, and then together with a partner building this seemed like a large uptick, right? So that was interesting for us. For us, sports is another category, which, I mean, it's very clear, right? I think India is becoming high on the sports bracket, even outside of cricket. We're becoming a fitness conscious country, and I think that's an opportunity. So there's a lot of noise around sports. But again, it's a deeply broken market, deeply offline, not moved online aggressively. There are no real homegrown brands in this category. We have global players who've come into the country and are still figuring out their distribution model online. So I think that's how we looked at sports and we said, hey, this is a huge opportunity too. Smaller sector, but huge opportunity. And then there's baby and pets, which again, it's our third category. We don't highly focus on it, but we found a great partner and we went with it first. So I think that's the third one. Again, no real big brands, not kind of made a splash online. So that's been our thesis. These are the three categories. We've let go of everything else. We think there's a massive, massive business to build just across these three categories. And that's how we look at it. I think we had to very clearly take a call. While a lot of other players in the market did majority buys, letting the entrepreneur still kind of run the show, through all of our conversations, and we live this day in and day out today, right? When you talk to an entrepreneur, a lot of them they're all tired, right? Because 95% of their time, they're just doing the grunt work of operating.
Yeah.
Right? There's some out of stock somewhere, there is some competition who has undercut you, there is some catalog issue, there's some bug somewhere. It's all recurring problems which is spending their time, but these are all innovators, right? You can't hire this kind of talent. So what we realized, and one of the propositions for all of them is, listen, for us it is, we will buy 100% of your company, we will take over all the operations and grunt work, which means it frees up your time. So we're giving you capital and we're making sure give you your time, and we make sure that we don't want any of them to go, right? So the answer is, they're the heart of this business and of course they shouldn't go, but we take away that operating period. And honestly, in the last 6 months, not a single entrepreneur has left. They're working with us, they're spending time, but they're spending time building the business that they want to, which means they're working with us on new product development, they're talking to vendors, they're managing supply chain, they're helping us better teams, working on design, and all of these are things that give them joy, and we're watching that happen, right? So I think that's our thesis. And I think, being an entrepreneur myself and having sold my company, I think my biggest fear always has been, if I don't like it, can I walk? All of us really care about our freedom, and I think that's true to any choice, option, freedom are the three most important things usually in a founder's brain, and it is, if somebody's going to control me, I'm going to die, and I think that's, nobody may able to articulate this, but it is always an underlying truth. And I think that's what we kind of gave them, right? We said, listen, here's the value for your business. We give you your time. And three, here's an option. If you think this is not going to work, you're free to walk whenever you want, right? And I think I needed those options when somebody gave me the option. And I think that's the same option that we've given all our partners. And in the process of doing this, so it was, I keep getting asked this, right? Did we jump too deep too soon? The answer is yes. I mean, it was hard. I mean, suddenly operating businesses end to end and letting things break. It was hard, but I think we've built the playbooks now. That first roll up, the first business on operating it was a nightmare. Yeah. We made a ton of mistakes. We learned, the second one got easier, third one got better. We're now on our seventh and nobody freaks out anymore. Now, people know. And that's the story.
Got it. No, that's fascinating again, because I think I see an evident line of clarity of thought somehow. I don't know if that's a constant, but that's the emerging pattern I'm seeing, because there's a lot of focus and vision that is being aligned by short-term action that of course compounds in the longer run, and that's like a silver lining for, I think, everyone listening in. But what's very interesting about such models, and I think you'll appreciate, is the last bit of the pie, right? Which is to, let's say you've identified a business, you've acquired one, and then you grow it, right? The operating bit where you find the, let's say, economies of scale, synergies, whatnot, right? And it's fascinating how the name of the company also comes from the 10x fact, if I'm not wrong, right? So the golden question I want to ask you is, what does it mean to kind of grow a brand from scratch? Like, what does that entail, right? Because I'm guessing you're acquiring companies at X revenue, you want to grow it to 10x. What does that entail in and of itself? If you can give us a playbook, because a lot of young entrepreneurs who are growing their brands, or a lot of people who are trying to understand this model, of course, they'll be wondering, how that piece of the pie fits in. So, would be very fascinating to hear how 10 Club does it.
Yeah. So, I say this very unapologetically, right? I think
Mhm.
people want to hear something extremely new. The answer is there is nothing new, right? I
Mhm.
think all of us have a zillion ideas.
Mhm.
Where everything falls short is execution,
Hmm.
right? And I think that is my boring answer to this. Every brand, a D2C brand, a marketplace first brand, any digitally first business has 7 or 8 levers,
Mhm.
and where it comes to product expansion on your marketplace, pricing correctly, cataloging, brand development, performance marketing, which is a big one. And whether it's your back end, which is replication, stocking, managing inventory to a point, because we live in a world today where consumers are getting used to 10-minute delivery.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're talking about anything that's going to take 24 hours and more is not viable anymore,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of people in the marketplace piece, because they're operating as single sellers, cannot replicate fast enough for next day delivery, and
Yeah.
hence lose. So there's it's simple. It's a lot of discipline, a lot of playbooks, a lot of replication, a lot of doing things at scale, but doing them well and fine tuning them. Right? When you operate this as individual entrepreneurs, you can't do everything. You just can't. Even for us, on a daily basis, we're prioritizing, right? Which means there are 10 things to fix. We fix three, the other seven we know will be mediocre. And hence you keep building those playbooks and you build the blocks, right? And with time, we will start doing all 10 well and do it seamlessly. So the answer is that, right? So for us, the answer is we're building deep expertise in all of these 7 or 8 layers, and we're doing it at scale. And because we can do it at scale, we're bringing in experts, right? Whose job is not to look at 20 things because it's cool to say early stage, we will do everything. I
Yeah.
think there are those people, of course, but then, our supply chain team in the last 4 months have about 68 years of experience, right? So
Wow.
I think the answer is 3 4 people have come together who've done this for a living, and that is their focus, and they will fix every single problem and do it well, right?
Mhm.
So we're making sure our foundations for these 7 or 8 levers required to grow a brand becomes really deep, really strong, and it'll only continue to get better. So I think that's the answer, right? And when we kind of break this down to a founder and we tell them, listen, you know the truth, you don't need us to tell you any story. Tell us where maximum amount of your time and energy goes. Imagine that being taken away.
Mhm.
The spirit of innovation thought, that we believe is super important, and that the entrepreneur stays for, because there is a financial benefit for them to stay. So I think that's where it is, and that's our pitch. So performance marketing, which is breaking, we do it at scale. We do branding, we do cataloging. Ask any seller marketplace out there, cataloging is a pain. And you don't need too much innovation, you just need a lot of discipline. um,
Got it.
Product innovation, once you start cracking supply chain, how do you introduce new products? It's hard.
Yeah.
And when you templatize all of this and you make it a little bit more seamless, life gets better.
That's phenomenal. I think streamlined execution at scale. I think that's a takeaway for me. But I mean, some of the best things are perhaps the boring, right? So I think therein lies the great answer in the not so cool maybe proposition, but the one that
Yeah,
works. So
all the ideas, creative, we have enough. We're all entrepreneurs. There are enough entrepreneurs out there.
yeah.
We're building a mean machine to execute.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because the other thing that stems from it, and part of it comes from your last answer, wherein you mentioned that we get these experts together who want to build at scale and who can execute in a manner which is phenomenal. Help us understand how you do that, and gather a team like that at the fundamental start, right? Because I'm guessing that when you're building this out, you don't have any brands with you, you don't have too much to show for. How do you still attract that kind of talent? What was the pitch to, let's say, early hires? How did you go about building the team, right?
Yeah. I'm just going to tell you the truth, because we laugh about this internally so much. We call it the sine wave, right? And all of us go through it. Like, all of us have a standing joke in the company that we're like, we all come in saying macha denge. And then 30 days later, we go into Holi. What happened? And then we go into this 90-day phase of saying, okay, I'm not a star. We all need to work together. I can't do everything. And then when that acceptance goes in saying things are going to break and I'm here because I will become a solid problem solver because I wake up every morning and saying three things broke. I fixed all three. Great. I'm ready for tomorrow. And then we come back, right? So I think that's a standing joke within the team now. I think all of us go through waves, and that's early stage. Uh, the crux of it, honestly, is we went very, very, very top heavy. So our first 10 to 15 hires were experts, right? I think the three co-founders are generalists, right? We're entrepreneurs, but we don't come from the ecosystem. And I truly believe that helps, right? Because we were very okay with saying we're not going to dictate everything. Y'all are the experts. Come tell us what to focus on. And it was not one person, right? It was 10 different people who were good at 10 different functions. And hence we were able to build the central piece. Was it hard? Of course, right? I mean, these are very, very senior people who had, everybody had opinions, ideas. I think the first few months was just building trust among everybody, saying if we don't learn to listen to each other and we don't listen to operate, and we think we know everything, we will fall. And I think that muscle has started to grow, right? It's been 8 to 10 months of us working together, at least the senior folk. And I think that respect has kind of brought in saying, I'm not a superstar. I know some things well, I don't know a lot of things. And I think that comes in a business like ours. I think it's a very slippery slope for one person to own everything. I think it needs to be deeply distributed. And I think we've learned that. Right. And the 10 people got the next 50 people.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's how it's kind of worked. For us, we also, because there's so much of an overlap, we have a ton of cross-sectional. I mean, the standing joke initially was like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do, but I'm going to do everything.
Yeah.
And that's what it was. When you talk to a lot of our partners and directors, most of them have shared resources, shared responsibilities. They're getting on calls to share problems. So
Yeah.
we now started taking our lanes, but initially it was a lot of. I think the other thing, and it was not on purpose, it happened organically, was because we were looking for such senior people for expertise. A lot of them were new to the startup ecosystem. So a lot of them came from traditional corporate. Uh, and I think it was very interesting because I watched, all our partners are actually, except Mona and HT, who both come from Amazon and Flipkart, but very, very senior at Amazon and Flipkart. Nobody had ever seen early stage, right? So I think what was very interesting for me to watch was how they had kind of gone up 15, 20 years, built themselves, became really senior partners and leadership at very established companies who basically took the bet and said, I'm willing to get my hands dirty and did everything. So I think that shows character at a very fundamental level.
Awesome. No, that's amazing to hear. I think it's very heartening to see, a lot of the people stepping up and contributing to generate such amount of great value. But I think the silver lining there was the trust aspect. And, I want to double click on that in the sense that for most companies at the early stage, there are multiple culture problems, which is to say that there are multiple stages to go through. But I'm guessing something that's unique to a 10 club model is my perhaps dynamic culture, because a lot of folks are getting added on to, let's say, the company culture at every step of the way, right? So let's say whenever you're acquiring a brand, I'm guessing there's some sort of integration that goes into it. There are teams getting integrated, whatnot. When you're faced with that unique, distinct challenge, right? How do you still go ahead and maybe get to establishing a culture which scales in a manner that is more absorbable in nature? I don't know how you tackle it, but it'd be great to understand how that plays out in your head and what that looks like in practicality.
I don't have a very romantic answer, right? But I'm going to give you, I think if you pick up on any single person in the team at 10 Club, I think we have a very unique culture where, and maybe it comes down from me, right? Which is, I think we also I mean, I have been a team member at early stage startup, and then I have led startups. And I think, where a lot of people go wrong is I think there's a lot of cover up and a lot of false like positivity that's created, and I think that leads to a lot of confusion and a lot of people don't understand what's happening, right? But I think again, it could have been that we went so high up with senior folks and we didn't have too many young 20-year-olds who would get disillusioned very easily, right? I think we started treating everybody like an adult, saying, man, you left where you are to come here. So you know the risks involved, you know the crazy involved. And we've tried building that piece where I think we've tried being transparency is the only way, right? I don't think everybody can know everything, because I learned it the hard way by being too transparent. I think people cannot handle this much
Yeah.
fluctuation, right? So there is a little bit of protection, but I think it's where I truly believe that I'm completely transparent with the leadership team. They have left where they are to come here and deserve to know as much
Yeah.
of the truth. If they're struggling with the truth, then we manage that somehow. But and then it is up to them to kind of get that down. We Most of our folders, most of our data, most of our documents are transparent to everybody. And that's the culture, right? And I think if somebody flips, of course everyone's going to flip once in a while.
Mhm.
But like I said, we started laughing about the sine waves. I think luckily all of us don't go into it together. There are pockets of it happening. But I think that's culture. I think culture is also constantly evolving,
Mhm.
right? And I think a lot of people miss that boat, right? People hold on to culture and say culture is what we set right at the beginning. I think it's important to hold your ground, but also the people who come into your system change, what your business needs changes, the environment around you changes. And I think culture is not one person, right? Culture is everybody through the door in the system adds to culture in some way or the other.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's that, right? So I think, are we the same people we were 12 months ago? I don't think so. I think all of us have changed. I think I have changed. I think the
Mhm.
last 15 months has been the journey of a lifetime. And I don't think I'm the same person who I was when I started. If I have to use a word, I think it's authentic and honest. And I wake up feeling differently quite often. And I think that's the liberty that's given to the team, right? That you don't have to
Mhm.
say the same thing. You don't have to kind of, so I think that's liberating in a lot of ways. And I think it's also scary in a lot of ways. So it's a mix of all of that.
That's again, I think, very interesting, very candid and unfiltered of you to mention that so much of it will get broken, but what stands out is the transparency aspect and the ever evolving sense of culture. I'd like to quickly take a moment to maybe step on two more aspects of the culture, and quick shout out to Cherika, part of the 10 Club team, who took out some time to speak with you. But as she mentioned, I think part of it was, let's say, building a very flat organization where everybody's allowed to be who they are, and at the same time also build one wherein execution is everything, right? You've spoken about the operating machine that you've built with 10 Club, right? Which is, let's say, again, both things which are not, let's say, parallel in nature, not the most intuitive ones, because it's one thing to say it, one thing to, let's say, perform it, right? Because people can come in, and there are a lot of things that go on, right? So help us understand how you maintain these sides of the spectrum, right? How do you maintain like a flat org despite the kind of scale at which you're growing, despite the kind of work you're doing, and at the same time not paint a rosy picture of everything being innovation, 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 some amount of it being core operating expertise and just getting your hands dirty.
Yeah. I mean, see, again, I think you rightly said, I think there are two opposing parts of a piece, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think we're a flat talk.
Okay.
I think because all of us are so approachable, and because everybody on the top has done everything that the next team has done, no one's come outside and given instructions, right? Everything has
Mhm.
been done. So I think there's a fluid kind of sense. And also, like any other early stage, there's so much happening that you can't work in silos. There's always an overlap, right? So I
Yeah.
think that's where there is a illusion of a flat structure. But we have designations, we have clear expertise difference, right? I mean, there is somebody, usually our partners have anywhere between 15 to 20 years of experience, and their team members have 4 or 5. So I think there is an unsaid level of balance. But I think the answer there is, we're also a remote first company. And hence there are a lot of things that the junior folk do faster, better than a lot
Mhm.
of the experts. And I think there's mutual respect that has started to emerge,
Mhm.
because while there's expertise, maybe there's not speed. But here, there maybe there is not expertise, but there is speed and the will to kind of execute. And I think both have very clearly understood that both are critical, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's where, if Cherika says it's flat, I'm extremely honored, right? Because I think that is where we've all come from. And I
Mhm.
think that's what I mean by everyone's realized that they're not a superstar.
Yeah.
Everybody needs everybody. And I think that organically starts happening. Execution is that, right? Uh, I mean, I can literally tell you the things that have broken this morning, right? And that is execution for us, right? Which is, and I can also say that in this journey, we're currently 55 people. we've not lost a single person in the last 12 months. Um, but we started getting the first few people who've said, hey, this is too hard for me.
Hmm.
And I think that's completely okay. I think the startup world is over romanticized to a lot of people. And I think we were completely okay with opening the door for people who've not worked at early stage. And we've had that dialogue saying, listen, it's not for everyone. You
Yeah.
don't have to wake up feeling this crazy every day. Some people thrive in it. Some people really like a lot of structure.
Yeah.
And I think that's the dialogue now, right? Which is, it is a operation heavy business. If you're more of a strategist, if you like planning 12 months in advance, chances are this is not for you. And a lot of people don't know till they try it,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's the dialogue, and I think it's always going to be a balance. While we encourage everybody to be themselves,
Yeah.
I think if you're not performing or delivering being yourself, then it's a very honest conversation of, hey, this may not be for you, and it's completely okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's the dialogue.
Fair, fair. I think again a lot of candidness and honesty there, and just like not romanticizing. There are a bunch of things that are go into executing something, and that needs to be shown as well instead of just painting a rosy picture. So I think kudos to you for doing that, and great to hear about the lack of attrition and the amazing culture that you've
It's
built.
so
So
exciting. I think people have been through pain, hell, back, and they still love it. So
yeah,
I think it's that. I think it's getting better, but of
yeah,
course, high action, high tension, high pressure, and it's not for everyone.
yes.
And we've done this through a pandemic, right? So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
No, it's absolutely commendable. And I think that's the magic of startups, right? Like when amazing people come together to do the unachievable and then like just create disproportionate values. I think that's just fantastic. I think as we go on to, conclude these segments of what has been a fantastic conversation, Bhavna, I think, of course, one of the primary things that everybody made buzz about in the ecosystem was, the large seed round. And considering the nature of the business, you do require that kind of capital. But what's more interesting, and as you alluded to a bit, was that say the kind of capital you were able to bring on board, right? The kind of people you were able to partner with, and the kind of venture funds that you got on board. Maybe talk to us about how strategic and deliberate were you in terms of the fundraise, and why that mattered, and how you built that in a way that would compound in the future, if that helps.
Yeah, so like I said, I think while we were even exploring the idea, we spent time speaking to partners, right? Our lead venture partners are Fireside and Upper 90. I truly deeply believe there is not another fund. They're not the biggest fund, right? They are relatively a smaller fund compared to the other funds in the country. But I truly believe nobody knows more than them about building consumer businesses in India that are digital first.
Yeah.
And I think it was, I mean, we made it happen in three days after we met,
Yeah.
right? I think it was. I think they are the best partners I could have, and they've really been the right partners, right? Through thick, thin, the unknown, the crazy, and it has been a crazy market, right? So I think for us, Fireside were early believers, and I think they got the model in a second, right? There was no explanation, there was no D2C. They said, hey, y'all are marketplace. This makes complete sense because we build D2C businesses and we know how hard it is, right? So I think they got the model in a second. I mean, they're not going to put hundreds of millions of dollars in us, but I think just the knowledge for the foundation was perfect. And they gave us their time, right? And they gave us their time. Upper 90, I mean, they wrote the first check in Thrasio. So there's nobody who understands this model from a global point of view better than them.
Yeah.
They're a venture partner. They actually carved out a smaller equity fund to invest in companies, and we got one of their first few checks from their equity rounds, right? For us, WTI is our debt partner, and it took us 7, 8 months to make that happen, right? They've not participated in India before. India is not a debt deep market. To run our business, we were very clear that we wanted to be debt heavy, and this is not a pure equity play. And India is quite a complex regulatory market to work around. So they've been patient, very respectful. They get the model as well. Their first check, I think a lot of their debt went into Thrasio as well. So I think it was the right partners for this model, and that was the thesis. I think I have an incredible board, um, and I think that's super important for all of us. We we wanted equal partners on the board who had skin in the game. And we think this is a long journey and there's no hurry to do. I don't think there's a hurry. Maybe there is. But I think there is space for 20, 30, 40 players in the Indian market. And yeah, so I think,
Yeah.
a few months is not going to make a difference.
Absolutely. No, I think that's pretty fair. But Bhavna, quickly double clicking on this, right? I think while you've laid down for us how well this was constructed, can you talk about the thought process behind doing this, right? Considering that a lot of young folks are listening in, how important was it to be as strategic as you were, and in order to kind of build out the roadmap for the future, how were you, deliberate about it? Was it thought process like? I think that'd be fabulous to hear.
Constructing the cap table.
Yeah.
See, it was not like I didn't pitch to 100 people, right?
Okay.
And that's bullshit. All of us would talk to like as many partners, right?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is, I think Fireside happened organically, quickly, but they were also not the first few people we spoke to. We obviously went to the large ones first and started having a lot of those conversations. We were talking to lot of international players. A lot of the international players were really scared of India because they just had no idea. Right. So it was a mix and match of everything. But I think like everything else in life, something just clicks and you just know.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it was that. Right.
Okay.
So I think Fireside was a no-brainer, right? It was a no-brainer at all. We actually went much later to them because they were so clear on D2C that I was under the belief that this may not be exciting for them. And so, I met them a month and a half into we were actually pitching, and then it just moved so quickly. Upper 90 was a long conversation. Like I said, we got introduced, we spoke for a while. They had never done India. So they had to build conviction about people before they came in. And it was a big bet for them to come into India, right?
Right.
So I think it was two ways, and we spoke to
Got
a
it.
ton of other people. And if not this round, I mean, life's long. I'm sure we will. We've made some really good, we've made some really good connections, and I think a lot of these funds are much larger and will come and become part of our journey along the way.
Certainly, no, that's great to hear. I think for the ending segment, there's a series of similar questions that I ask each founder to just end the conversation with, and these are more personal in nature. The first one there for you is pretty much, you spoke about how life has changed for you in the last 15, 18 odd months, and you've built a business in the past. You've had a decent career wherein you've done so many things, right? Talk to us about how the founder journey is played out for you, and how is that, we talk about companies scaling this fast, we talk about the rapidness that companies grow with, but it's phenomenal how founders just wear on these capes a day in, day out, and just adjust to situations every now and then and evolve over time, right? So maybe help us with that narrative of how you have grown over time with the amazing journeys that you've been a part of, and of course, how 10 Club has been for you since the very inception and maybe present day.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very innate in all of us to jump into something that seems scarier, right? So even if you look at my journey, I think Lamudi was in super, like my first venture was small. I was in Paris. I was 24 years old. I was obsessed with an idea. I managed to gather some force, but I built it for 2.5 years. So I think I learned perseverance. I learned so many things of what a founder should not do from my first venture, right? Getting obsessed with an idea, not being flexible enough to change. All of those mistakes are what makes a foundation. I mean, ask anybody who knows me from then. I had said I would never do this again. Like never. It's done. It's damaged me. I'm going to get a job and live a great life. It's just not possible. And I think I've said it so many times, saying never again, never again, never again, overdone. Uh, and then Namudi happened, and I thought that was the hardest thing I had to do, right? Which is I was in a different market, a country I'd never been in. I was working with people from 12 different countries, very different. It was very exciting, but it was of course so scary, right? And I think the fear drives you and keeps you excited, and it just becomes like a drug. You get used to it and you just don't want to do something that seems safe. So back then that seemed large, right? And it came. But I think I can build another Lamudi in my sleep now. It seems so easy, right? Because it was not varied, it was straight, it was not, there was one answer in scaling it. And I think when 10 Club came by, did I think it would be this complex? The honest answer is no. I think I knew it was a huge piece. But now that I'm in it, there are so many moving parts every day that it's exciting and scary at the same time. And I think that's what drives me, right? So I think every venture has been slightly larger, slightly bigger, slightly scarier.
Yeah.
And I think that's the drive. Before after Namudi, I said I will never do it again. I said I'm done. I'm done. 2 weeks later, here's number three.
Yeah.
Now
No, that's
on your podcast, I will tell you 10 Club will be my last venture, but we should.
no, we hope not because of the amazing work that you're doing year over year, and it's just phenomenal. I think it speaks to the DNA of entrepreneurship, right? It's just like putting yourself in uncomfortable shoes and coming out the brighter side, always along with the team, along with like massive value, and that's just the beauty of doing this. So kudos to all founders out there, and especially the kind of work you've been able to do.
There's
Um,
definitely a wiring issue in all of us somewhere, but if we make the world a better place, why not?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the beauty of it. For the second last question, Bhavna, I think there's an evident pattern of, let's say, trying to prioritize, figure things out, build things right in you. Maybe talk to us about some of the principles that work for you under stress as well, right? I mean, I'm not going to go to the extent of, let's say, going after the challenges and whatnot. I mean, before this conversation, we were talking about how that becomes like, a standard slippery slope. But what do you think plays out best for you in the steady state, right? Like, who are you in terms of thinking principles? How do you perhaps manage to prioritize? And how does Bhavna work in times of, stress? I think that's going to be something that would be interesting to explore.
Uh, so I think let me not talk about. So I deeply believe that I have a very strong support system.
Mhm.
I have an incredible set of parents and in-laws who've been total troopers, right? I mean I've been quite radical with the things I have done, and I think they've always been cheerleaders.
Mhm.
I've had I do have a very strong partner. I think when I started this, I was at venture number one with my boyfriend, who's seen me through everything, and now he's my husband.
Yeah.
Uh, I think that's really important to have that support system outside, because I think if that was shaky, I think this would have been really, really hard. So I think I have a great support system in my family. I have fantastic friends who actually don't care what I do. Like, I have a set of friends who are not founders, who don't get what I do at all. And I think love me for who I am. They never talk to me about work.
Yeah.
Uh, find me ridiculous for what I do with myself. They're like, why? You know? And I think that's really important because it's so grounding and it just takes me away from,
Mm.
I have life outside of this. And I think that's what I've learned. It's very important to have a life outside of this because this is all consuming,
Yeah.
and it can take you into a very dark place if this is all you're focused on. So I think it's very important to have that. And that's what gets me through hard times. Honestly, when I'm at my low, I think I have learned to step aside and say, nothing's, you do your best. If it breaks, it breaks. Life is
Yeah.
fine. I think it's the same kind of piece to kind of bring into the team, right? I have learned that, and I think people say this, but I think it is the absolute truth, is you surround yourself and bring people in the team who learn to put it as a we and not an I. And I think
Mm.
uh, very quickly, very soon, people start thinking of I and not a we. And if you don't think as a collective, I think that's a very slippery slope while building teams this early.
Yeah.
So I think that is important. And when you're going through a hard time and you see the team care about it. I've seen a fair number of my senior management call me the next morning and saying, "Oh shit, I didn't sleep. What do we do about this?" And I feel that just shows intent at a very deep level, and you realize that you're not alone in this, right? I think a lot of founders go down this hole of saying it's all my responsibility, it's all on me, and you get very lonely. But I think if you learn to start letting people in and you say, "Hey, this is our burden to carry together," I think it just becomes so much more fulfilling. And generally, when you kind of overtake a hardship, you laugh about it.
Yeah.
And we've all done this, right? So I think it comes down to people, right? It's just externally and internally, how do you feel like you're not alone?
Absolutely. No, that's brilliant to hear because I think you started off with a hardship question, turned out to be an answer on people. And that's I think,
Maybe that's
wonderful.
my on thing, right? I
No, no,
mean,
I think
life is
that's,
full of hardships. You can go sit in a corner and say, "Oh, it was so hard," but
yeah.
generally, it's the people through the hard times that make it all fun.
Certainly, no, that's spectacular to hear. I think I've loved every bit of this conversation. And for the last one, I think there's a very unique thing that I wanted to point out that the first interaction I had with Bhavna actually pointed out to me that I didn't have enough women on my show, which I am guilty of doing. And that was not Maybe I should have been more conscious of it, and I will be in the future. But the reason I point this out is one thing I've observed again from a very distant land is that you seem somebody who's very bold, who's ambitious about what she wants to do, is a leader from the get go, and has strong principles, right? Talk us through what builds that bhavna and how you look at maybe entrepreneurship for the last question. I know this is pretty generic in nature, but it's amazing what I've heard of you, the kind of write, the posts you kind of write, and everything that you do, right? And in this conversation as well, there's this clear ambition that, want to build this out. So maybe talk to us about that. And I think that'd be a great wrap to a wonderful conversation.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can.
Hello?
I can hear you, Bhavna.
Can you hear me?
I can. Can you?
I lost you for a minute.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, no.
So shall I take a crack at it?
Yes, I'll edit this part.
Yeah. Yeah, so we laughed about this. Every time I go put a post on LinkedIn, I'm very, and this may come from my husband, who makes a lot of fun of me being too preachy. So I try really hard not to be preachy, and but I think it's very, very important. I think all of us are driven by some goals. I think work, building something is important, but I think there are very few people like me, right, in the ecosystem. And I think I am where I am purely because of the lottery card life had to play. Yeah. Got me the parents, the partner, get a good education, no strings attached. And I think if I can speak so boldly with no apprehension is only because of the card life played me, right? And I don't think everybody gets that opportunity, right? So I feel like if I don't stand and scream and take a stand, I know in the last 50, I've not been this person who's been vocal on social media about things like this, right? But I've realized that it encourages a lot of younger people and maybe older people, right? I mean, my leadership team today has a lot of really strong women. And I know that they're because I'm as vocal about my post, and I think they love it. And it gives them the drive. And I've watched the change, right? Like, I think we as women question, overthink, worry, we're very empathetic. And I think that's a strength, but I think the world is not built for this much empathy. And I think we're in that process of changing to realizing how strong empathy can be. I don't know if you read it, but a few days ago, I was having a conversation with somebody who literally, I think, came from a good place, but told me that I need to come across more stern and more cutthroat, because I come across as somebody who can be taken advantage of, because I will understand and I will let them be. And I was like, how sad a world do we have to be in where, if I'm empathetic and I can connect with you, I'm looked as a weak, I'm looked at still in today's day and age as somebody who's weak, because I'm not weak. I don't think anyone who's met me has ever told me that I'm not confident or they can take me for a ride, because I think that's absolutely not true. But I think that's the reality of the world. And I think whatever anyone says, I think women still are a minority in this space, and we're built differently. I think our incentives are very different. And I think it needs people like me and a lot of other women out there to talk about it a lot more. And that's all I'm doing. I think it drives me that there is more of a purpose than just building something. And so that's why I do it.
That's phenomenal. Kudos to that purpose, and kudos to all the amazing things that Tent Club is doing. Thank you so much, Bhavna, for a phenomenal conversation. I certainly enjoyed this a lot. I think we've spoken about a variety of things from, let's say the Tent Club model and understanding, what it means to integrate culture, lay down the guardrails, have insane focus and execute, and your values. So I think this has been phenomenal. I hope you enjoyed it as well.
I did. Thank you so much. You're welcome to come over for coffee anytime. Happy to come for coffee, but it was very nice meeting you. Thank you so much for having me.
Cheers.